Jesus was a rock star.
We have been hanging out in the Great Feast, and it's been a lot of fun for me personally because it is very personal where my heart and life and my relationship with the Lord are at right now. And so it's very close to my heart. And so in last summer, I hung out in the Great Feast a great deal. And so you're getting some of that. You're also getting the natural progression. Just so you know, it was always my intention. When I felt like the Lord gave me a plan. When I got back from my sabbatical, I felt fresh. And honestly, it felt like I could see again. It was like the world had gone into HD. It was like I had a sense of what the Lord wanted to do again, which honestly I hadn't had for a couple of years. I was just being faithful and grinding it out. So He's been so good to me. And so this is coming from that. And it was always my plan in the first 4 months of my coming back that we wouldn't do any evangelism. Why? Because all I ever want to do is evangelism. And I've learned that. So we took the first few months of September, October, November in there, and then of course Christmas, we talked about Christmas, but we spent a lot of time, and I even told you this, we need to get together and laugh together. I told you that was the most spiritual thing we could possibly do. And, we're small, but we're tight. I mean, I love you guys, and we have enjoyed each other, and it has been just better than I could have thought, But it was also my intention that then we would shift gears a little bit and start looking for opportunities to love our community. And so we want to love each other first, but then we also want to give ourselves opportunities to put our arms around the people around us. And so it was always my intention for the last 6 months or so that about this time of the year we'd start to look around and say, okay, God, what do you have for us? What do you want us to do? Now, with that in mind, I have been to, I spoke to somebody. I don't want to embarrass anybody, so I'm not going to say their name, but I spoke to somebody. I was kind of thinking about this, found out that they were aware of the New Life Center, and they mentioned that they didn't have a lot of people doing the devotions there. And so I went and I served dinner at the New Life Center. And I did that every week. Elizabeth and I did that together every week for a long time. And we did a really neat ministry there. And we did some other stuff there on that same night and things. But I just wanted to kind of get back in there. So in the same day, I went to the Genesis Center in the morning, which is like a rehab thing. They lived there for a year. And it's a very intensive program. And so I was there last Thursday. I was there. And I didn't even ask to preach. I just asked the guy that does that service if I could come along. And he knew me, so he asked me to bring my guitar. And to be honest with you, I was very grateful because they asked me to come up. And I'm trying to be gentle, because I don't want to push my way in anywhere. I want to be very humble with people who are doing things, but he knew I played, and so he told me to bring my guitar. So I brought my guitar, and I got up there, and I played some songs, and I got to tell you, you guys worship Jesus, but you don't worship Jesus like an addict that has just found him and now is set free from a whole bunch of gunk. You know what I mean? It's just. At least it's so special. I can't even tell you. We were singing that second song, and the tingles were just going up and down my back. And I thought, this, I could just do this forever. you know. And the guys, they really appreciated it and things. And so I had that, and I'm thinking about some other things too. So my job right now is to, I want to rope you into that. I want you to have that feeling. I want you to have that moment where you are loving somebody and you have introduced them to Christ, and I want you to see that pure new Christian, Jesus has set me free, look in somebody's eyes. I want that for you so badly, because that's the best there is. It is so good, and so over the next period of time, I looked into Youth for Christ. I looked into, there's some jail ministry opportunities we can have. I'm going to be going into the jail this week and doing some things. I reconnected with my friend Mark Hines, the jail chaplain in Jamestown prison. Their meetings are on Wednesday nights, and so I might be gone, not this Wednesday, but the next Wednesday, because I might go do a service in Jamestown, and I'm just throwing spaghetti against the wall for opportunities. And what I'm really looking for is to find places where I can say, hey, come on with me and do this with me, and just put you in a position where there's people around you that are accessible, that you can just love people who are different than you, because that's really what we've been talking about for a bunch of weeks now. And as I studied the Great Feast, and as I was going through my sabbatical and understanding myself and who's God called me to be more and more, what became apparent is I am who I am. And I've always been drawn to folks that were outside of the box, and you know that about me. And so with that in mind, we've been talking about this for a while, and I think I put some things in here. Then the resurrection of the righteous, God will reward you for inviting those who could not repay you. Jesus is teaching we're in the book of Luke, and in the book of Luke, actually we're going to be hanging out Matthew again tonight. I'm sorry for that. But we've been hanging out in Luke, and they're talking about the great feast. And Jesus shares this stuff. And what we find is, in all of these, we've been looking at this, is that they invited a bunch of people who should have gone. They were the first invites. And they invited a bunch of people to this great feast. And of course, God is the king. Inviting them all in, and they're all too busy. And the scripture is really careful to show us. I told you this last week. They had dumb excuses. Remember that? The dumb excuse. They're bad excuses. Weren't even hardly trying to have a good excuse. They were just too flippant and too busy with their own lives. And then they send it out to everybody, all out, and to bring in everybody. Now, of course, the theology of it, this Bible verse isn't actually talking about us witnessing. I'm using it as a metaphor that way, but this verse was actually talking about the Jewish people. Jesus went to them first, and they rejected Christ, and then it got opened up to everybody. The Gentiles, us, you and me, we are the lame, sick, and the blind. In the parable of the great feast, okay? Now, just so you know, I'm very careful about not taking the scripture out of context, and I don't think I have erred at all to use that as a metaphor to say this is what we should be doing to reach out to our city. But technically, that's not what the scripture is saying. I'm using it as a metaphor. Are you following? Me, please laud at me. So I get irritated when preachers use the scripture in ways that not meant for. And I saw, anyway. We won't talk about that. So the idea is, we know we should reach them, but in the parable of the sheep and the goats, it tells us how we should do it. It tells us how we should do it. And I apologize because we're headed back into Matthew. And Matthew, he tends to be a little more harsh than Luke, and that's just kind of how it is. And we're going to be hanging out Matthew chapter 25. Because it really shows how Jesus wants to fill the great feast. Oh, look what I just did. I just messed that up. There we go. Now I'm back again. It shows how he wants to fill it. So in this way, in the great feast, the parable that we did, they went out and they said, invite them. If they say no, just find anybody you can find. Now, this verse is absolutely talking about reaching out to our city. It is 100%. No theologian or pastor would ever interpret this any other way than how we respond to the people around us. And so that's why we're going to camp here for a minute, because we know from last week that we should be going out to our city. And now we're going to see how Jesus wants us to do it. And we're also going to see just how much Jesus wants us to do it. Master is furious. Okay, this is the recapping. So the master is furious. Invite the poor, the crippled, and the blind. By the way, I finished the sermon this morning because I didn't get done with it because I was with the guys all weekend long. So that was in the great feast. Jesus had said when he was doing the teaching about humility, if you remember a couple of weeks ago we talked about that, he says this twice about one in just a few verses. So this is the point that Jesus is really, really making. Now Matthew, we're going to go into Matthew, and I'm not going to read all of this, but I do want to give you some context. The disciples are walking in Jerusalem, and they're freaking out there. And Jesus is going to die soon, all right? This is towards the end of his I think it's even that week. There was 1 week where Jesus did, it was that week actually, come to think of it. Disciples are walking and they're looking at the temple. This would be Herod's temple, and it was massive. If you ever want to get just completely freaked out at how big it was, go on YouTube and do Herod's temple, and there's people that have created graphics that will show you how immense this was. And the disciples are looking at this temple, and they're like, whoa, man, this is so amazing. And that's when Jesus says, do you see all these buildings? I tell you the truth, they'll be completely demolished. Not one stone on top of another. Jesus not so impressed with Herod's temple. And it would be destroyed actually in AD 70, but that's another sermon. And then later, Jesus is sitting around, and this is just later in that chapter, or in the next chapter, he's sitting at the Mount Olives, and they sent Hey, Jesus, will you tell us about the end times? Tell us about the last things and your return, the end of the world. And you can notice in the scripture, as Jesus is getting closer and closer to the crucifixion, he's getting blunter and blunter and blunter, right? He's being more harsh with the Pharisees. He's saying, hey guys, I'm going to die and I'm going to be raised again. I mean, and they took it as a metaphor, apparently, but he's just getting blunter and just saying it right out. And he tells us a few things in these, and we're not going to read these, but he talks about it in verses 4 through 15. He tells us some terrifying things about the end times. He tells us about the 10 bridesmaids, or if you're in the King James Version, the 10 virgins. And they weren't ready. And they were left. And that was a parable. Hey, people were waiting for my return. They didn't have enough oil. 5 went. And 5 stayed. And then there are 3 servants, and they weren't faithful. So the bridesmaids weren't ready, and the servants, they weren't faithful. And this is all eschatology, big fat word for the end times. This is the end time things. And then Jesus has been sharing bluntly for all these verses, 4 through 5, then he tells the parable of the sheep and the goats. So that's where we land. Are you with me? If you say, hey, okay, thank you. All nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate. This is God. Okay, so God is there, God the Father is there, and in the scriptures, all the nations. And Jesus is still talking about the end times. He's already told. Two parables about the end times, and now we get the big one. They'll be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Now that would have been very normal. Jewish people would have known that you got to separate sheep and goats. It's something that they had to do all the time. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come. And those, you are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry. Thank you, Steve Green. And you fed me. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick. You cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. And then, just like we Heard from Keith Green, so I wanted to play you that song because I think he does it so fun. Then the righteous ones. Who are they? They're the righteous ones. Will reply, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and gave you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and have no clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison? And the king will say, I tell you the truth, when you did it to the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. And I would say to you, the least of these, we know who the least are these because Jesus told us, the lame, the sick, the crippled. We know the least of these because when they asked him, hey, Jesus, tell us how to love. And he shares the story of the Good Samaritan. Basically a story about racism. Jesus is saying the least of these is the person that can't pay you back, and it's the person who's the most different from you. That's the least of these. Because anybody will love their friends, right? And so when you did it for the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it for me. And they were surprised. They were surprised because they said, well, when did you do these things? So they were surprised. But then the king turns to those on their left. Remember, we're in Matthew, okay? Away with you, you cursed ones. Go into eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his demons. Because I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger. You didn't invite me in. I was naked. You didn't give me any clothing. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't invite me in. And they will reply. They thought they were going to heaven. Right? They're there. They're in heaven. They're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Wait, no, Lord. They were like, Lord, when? Because they're thinking this isn't fair. They had been doing everything right in their eyes, right? When were you hungry, thirsty, or a stranger, naked, sick, or in prison, and not help you? And of course, when you refuse to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you are refusing to help me. You know what? Why? How were they different? Was it just that they didn't help? But I take a step back and I said, well, why did one group help? Because they were surprised that was what the master was looking for. You know, Lord, when were you naked? They were not doing it for points. They were not doing it to squeak into heaven. They were surprised that that was the measuring stick that was being used to measure them. They were both surprised, but the good ones too. When, Lord? And so I got thinking about that. So how can I minister to Jesus by loving the least of these better? And I can tell you that guilt and grit do not work. They don't work. I don't think that those people were necessarily evil. They were rejected, so I guess they're evil. But I think they were just distracted. They didn't see the lame. They didn't see the sick. They didn't see. They had their friends. You know, when they went to their church potluck, they sat with their friends, and someone over there sat by themselves. You know, or someone walks into church and we sit with our friends. Now we do a little better, maybe not. I mean, it's not like it never happens, but when there's not very many people, it's easier for us. You know, I can find you quicker in a group of 30 than I can in a group of 1,000. But even still, you know, we don't mean to, but we just drift over here to where we're comfortable. And it's what we all do, because that's our default. Because your friends, it's a two-way street. You know, you have enough friends here already. Why would you go to that table? Because you just really enjoy these people, and that's your one chance to talk to them. So no one's going to blame you for sitting with your friends. No one's going to do that. So I know that guilt and grit doesn't work. So what then does work? Why is it that and I look at my own heart, because I had a day last week. It was the same day that I served the meal at the New Life Center. So I guess that would make it, I don't remember what day it was. But I have a friend, and my friend is in his room. I wrestled with him in high school, and he always had cerebral palsy. And I reconnected with him a few years ago, and so I've been visiting him on and off now. I regularly, sometimes I'll get too much time goes by, you know, but at least once a month I try to get over there and and sit with them and stuff. And Lord has a sense of humor, right? It was on Saturday. Saturday is kind of a day off for me. I don't do a lot of stuff. Saturday's your day off. It's my day off too. I'm supposed to take 2 days off a week, Fridays and Saturdays. But I thought, it's fine. I'm gonna go run over and Mark sent me a message and he said, I got a new bed. No, I need a headboard put on my bed. I'll buy you lunch. And to be honest, it had been too long since I'd gone to see Mark. I tried to get over there more, but you're busy, and it's his little apartment. It's not like a real engaging place, and we do have a lot of great history together and stuff, and I do enjoy him. But boy, those weeks can turn into months just in a second, and it hadn't been quite months, I don't think, but it had been a while longer than I wanted, and so I'm gonna go put on his headboard. And so we got there. I got there. Well, he didn't need his headboard put on. He needed an entire bed built. And so, and I left. I see if I remember now. I told them, they said, I'm just going to stop by here and see Mark. It was 3 hours. And says, put his bed together and stuff. And then that night, I think, that I went to the New Life Center and was doing the food, and it's so much fun. They come by and I'm joking with them and stuff, and it was just a hoot. And then they somebody knew